Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 15th, 2021. Time for another show. The NAFTA calendar says it is Revolution Day in Mexico. So I guess if you're not up and having a revolution yet, get started if you're in Mexico. I mean, don't start anywhere else. I'm not saying that that's what you necessarily need to be doing this morning. But I don't know. Do we wish our Mexican friends happy Revolution Day? Is it a happy revolution? This is apparently the 1910 revolution. I had to look this up. I apologize for not knowing everything that I should know. Well, we never get taught anything about Mexican history. That's a problem. And you can address it with your local school board. And then there'll be a huge fight and someone will kick you out and say that you support CRT. And you'll be a big part of the national scene. So it's your opportunity to get involved today. All right. Well, you know, what a weekend. It was relatively quiet as usual, but Republicans used it to stir the hornet's nest, of course. We'll check in with Greg Dworkin. He's got lots of news about the happenings over the weekend. Most of it really, to me, I guess what really stuck with me over the weekend was the news was all the things that we knew about how terrible Trump was with COVID, how terrible he was with destroying American democracy and attempting to overthrow the incoming government and overturn the election results. All confirmed as usual, but also, as usual, confirmed 6 months to a year too late, even though we all knew what was happening at the time. But now confirmed because books are coming out, basically, that say, oh yeah, all those things that we were observing were, and that you were observing were in fact true, and now we're on the record with people admitting that they were true, and now you can go around believing it. I guess, I don't know, no loss to you and me. I guess we knew these things then. And it's worth saying we knew these things then because they were being reported then. It's not actually the case that, giant swaths of the story were simply covered up and not reported until they could be put in a book and monetized. But that's the way it's beginning to feel with these things anyway. And I don't know, people still sit up and take notice when it comes out in book form, but it was being reported. And, all right, well, whatever. We'll move on from there. Time now to start thinking about all the other things that are happening today, but I don't know. I'm obsessed with this one. But the Kagro in the Morning Show is live now. That's true. Bill says so it must be true. And we'll go with that. The president, with President Biden sharpening his nibs, to sign the big roads, bridges, ports, etc. bill today, BFD, BIF, the infrastructure bill, getting signed today. Kagro X, will Kagro X, it's a question, sorry. Will he finally concede that this is God's chosen infrastructure week? Good question. Is infrastructure week the week in which the legislative branch passes the bill, or the week in which the executive signs the bill? And given that the Constitution is pretty clear that the president actually doesn't have to sign the bill, et cetera, I don't know. How would you argue about this? But yet it's his bill, and very closely identified with him. And really, honestly, we should do everything we can to make sure that people give him credit for it, given that the polling says it's very popular, but they all dislike Joe Biden anyway because, I don't know, reasons and what people chant at NASCAR races. More advice in the newspaper today about whether we should or shouldn't be ignoring Let's Go Brandon. And gosh, if it isn't just the same thing we see every time any controversy arises. One set of Democratic strategists saying, ignore it at your peril. And the other saying, no, giving it attention feeds the fire. And, strategists are always in disarray, no matter whether the Dems themselves are or not. Greg Dworkin is here at the appointed time. No disarray that I can detect. So let's go, Brandon, I guess. I don't know. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Yeah, good morning, and thanks, Brandon.
What else to say? Yeah, sure. I say we just go straight at it and just call everyone Brandon. And If they don't like it,
it's,
then that's their fault.
it doesn't have much salience, the Let's Go Brandon stuff. I mean, for people who want that to be a thing, I suppose it's a thing, but,
Yeah, there's nothing
most
to
on the left
do
wind up
with that, I
making
don't
fun of
think.
it, so it doesn't really have the punch that the right wants, because they want to punch liberals and hippies with it,
Yeah, I
and
guess.
if the blow doesn't land, it doesn't work.
Like, okay, no one knows. All right, but I don't know.
You know,
I got no
they
advice
do it
for you
anyway,
on
but
it.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's the landscape
Yes.
for 2022 is set with this thermostatic stuff we talked about on the show last week.
Let's go thermostat.
And we even had a mention of a story about the political advisors, Democrats especially, who insist that whatever it is that they're peddling is the reason for whatever it is that happened, when in fact most of it has absolutely nothing to do with them. Yeah, for example, you could look at Democratic infighting, soul searching, introspection after the Virginia and New Jersey elections. And the fact of the matter is, Biden and Democrats are polling poorly, and maybe it has more to do with gas prices than anything else in the world.
Yeah, probably it very often does, and that drives that drives people's decision making all the time.
It does,
boy.
because people drive, and so
Well,
you have
electric
this
vehicles.
problem. Now, those are supposedly going to be moderated, and I have to double check and see where the economic forecast came from. Might have been Goldman, might have been Moody's, not sure, but the a very, very rosy prediction for how the economy will look next year, rather. And that obviously has a huge effect on the 2022 election. For right now, Democrats are polling poorly, and the setup for how things are going to work is not great. E.J. Dionne notes that ever since this month's elections in Virginia and New Jersey signal real trouble for the party, Democrats have been tearing themselves apart over the controversies Republicans want them to talk about. Note to Democrats, this is the reason they're called wedge issues.
Okay.
Right? So
I don't know. Maybe.
basically, that's the problem. That's probably the most important lesson relates to the importance of controlling the terms of the political debate, and that's why this being Infrastructure Week as well as last week being Infrastructure Week matters. Because that's the debate that the Biden administration wants to have.
All right.
Harry Enton, no, he has something else. John Harwood at CNN, same source, media source. Can Biden revive his popularity in time for the midterm elections?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe.
All right.
It's hard. Republicans rode the Tea Party wave of 2010 to control the House. You can't spend double-digit unemployment. Said Dan Pfeiffer, Obama's White House communications director at the time. You can't spend high gas prices and higher grocery prices.
Okay, I will.
So Obama veterans see a different path to accelerating Biden recovery. Early in their terms, presidents suffer from comparison with their own campaign promise. In re-election years, they benefit from framing sharp contrast with opposition party challengers.
All right.
So there's a
Makes some
larger
sense.
lesson there. When Democrats run against themselves, they lose because Democrats can't possibly deliver what Democrats ideally show as aspirational goals because nobody can. Right?
Yeah, I guess
they're
that's-
impossible to get to.
Right.
But when you run against Republicans, you do a little better.
Okay, let's do that.
Right? I didn't stop climate change, and I didn't get everything I wanted out of the Glasgow conference, but those guys are fascists. And, they're trying to burn your books.
Not the Glasgow guys. The other guys.
But, if you run against Republicans that way, you do better
Sure.
than if you just say, well, compare me to what I said I was going to do on climate.
This makes sense.
No, you don't do as well. But, compare me to the
Because
guys
they
who
were so
simply
good.
want to go back to the 1950s and lock you in the kitchen.
Right. And address none of these other things. They're yelling about these things so that we don't do anything about the hard stuff, which is
Right,
what I'm
exactly.
doing. Okay.
So, framing is hard, and the media is more interested in comparing Democrats to themselves than they are comparing them to Republicans. The entire debate about what Democrats can pass, there's virtually no media outlet that adds, and by the way, this is all made all the harder because no Republican will cooperate in governance. I mean, that's kind of an important dynamic here. And if it's mentioned at all, on rare occasion, it'll be Chuck Todd saying, and it just might work.
Yeah. This is true. There's not much discussion of, everyone focuses on, well, can they get Manchin and Sinema? Well, yeah, I know that's difficult and everything, but why should they have to, given that this is like a global problem and the facts are the facts and nobody on this other side, you have a whole party refusing to seriously address the issue and come to their own conclusion, and that's
right,
kind
and
of
that's
weird.
kind of a more important story that's completely uncovered.
Yes.
Right. But, it is what it is, and
Greg
so that's
told
the media landscape you have to deal with.
Yes.
New York Times,
Total
Republicans
landscape.
gain heavy House edge in 2022 as gerrymandered maps emerge on a highly distorted congressional map that is still taking shape. Party has added enough safe House districts to capture control of the chamber based on its redistricting edge alone, 5 or 6 seats. Their point is that House elections are becoming less and less competitive, which has all sorts of ramifications, including when you put a nutter in like Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, you're stuck with her, and you end up having to strip her of committee assignments, or
Madison
others,
Cawthorn or Lauren Boebert, and so they're the ones winding up driving the conversation.
Yeah,
because what they do is wedge issues.
right.
And the Senate
What they
side
really need is wedgies.
doesn't look quite as gloomy as the House side. Republicans seek a U.S. Senate takeover, says the Washington Post, in 2022, but struggle over candidates. Chris Sununu in New Hampshire being the latest example. However, polling from Washington Post over the weekend suggesting that in the swing states, Republicans have a huge generic ballot advantage, which is almost unheard of, suggests that it almost doesn't matter who the Republicans recruit.
Okay, well, let's let them go into their recruiting season with that in mind.
Well, that's what I'd like, and then let's see what happens when gas prices come down next week and the economy gets better next month.
Right.
Next year.
And then someone says legitimate rape, and
yeah, things happen. So, on the one hand, it's important to acknowledge that things do look gloomy. On the other hand, that doesn't mean it's written in stone. So I think that's really the message there.
Okay.
So if you step back and look at the overall big picture, one of the things that happened Friday that was after your show, and certainly after my Thursday appearance, that we absolutely should discuss, and that is leading off my pundit roundup today.
Pundit roundup. All right. I'm set.
Which was the repercussions of the Steve Bannon indictment are still being felt.
Okay.
And that was late Friday. And why is it important? Bannon's not going to testify. He'll go to jail. Fine. But
Yes.
Mark Meadows doesn't like jail.
Okay.
And the kind of pressure that is put on Meadows is a different order of magnitude compared to what the pressure is on Bannon. And then thirdly, there's a whole bunch of people we've never heard of who are their aides and assistants and don't have media publicity. They don't have the notoriety. They don't have the ability to raise money, in other words.
Yes, okay, right.
And therefore, the message to people like Bannon and Meadows, which is also the message to Jeffrey Clark, which is also the message to the people you haven't heard of, is this really how you want to spend the next couple of years of your life dealing with?
Yeah.
In the end, Bannon may be able to wait this out, and he may be able to appeal, and he may be able to delay, and this, that, and everything else. But once Congress gives these indictments to the executive branch, the idea that the Republicans might take the House in 2022 doesn't end the problems for these folks who have been indicted.
Yeah, that's true.
That's an executive branch function. The DOJ is a separate entity, semi-autonomous, yada, yada, yada. We know how that works under Trump. But nonetheless, it still has a life of its own and can't simply be swayed by the possibility of House changing hands. And again, if you want to spend, if you're a low-level aide, who had some exposure and lots of knowledge about what happened at that time, and you want to spend the next 2, 3, or 4 years completely consumed with legal battles, the House January 6th committee is telling them, well, fine, we could wait that out because justice is doing it, not us. So don't expect to be rescued by an election in 2022. Your problems are going to go well beyond that. Is that really what you want? And that's really the message from the Bannon indictment that's important.
Well, I hope that that's the case, and that Justice Department is preparing for that. I imagine that were the Republicans to take back control of the House, they would attempt to, well, they would shut down the committee, but they would attempt to convince the DOJ and I guess the courts that the issue was now mooted and they shouldn't
but Biden's
pursue
in the
it,
White
but-
House, and the Democrats
Right.
in the White House. The Democrats may or may not still have the Senate,
Yeah,
but
well,
that doesn't matter. It's
they'll be there
an
to
executive
argue.
branch function. And
True.
so the White House can simply say, nah.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be there to argue
another 2
for
years.
it. That's true. But yeah, it may throw another wrinkle in there, and we'll see how it goes. Also, Bannon's an important one certainly, but he's also the one with the least claim to any executive privilege, since he wasn't actually an employee of the administration at all. Meadows faces the same battle, except that he's got a stronger claim to the executive privilege.
He's got a stronger
plea,
claim and a
anyway.
weaker backbone.
But yeah, we'll see. Right, and all he has to do is take one look. Just look at what prison has done to Steve Bannon. Well, will change your mind. And he hasn't even gotten there yet. So imagine what he's going to look like in a little while.
And
I'm
again,
just saying,
so
eaten by
if their
rats.
aides who know everything they do
Yeah,
take the same approach and say, okay, well,
yeah, they can't
you're
raise the
asking
money.
me to spend the next 3-4 years of my life after that, we don't know, and I don't have the money for this.
Right.
And you're ruining my family, and maybe I think I'll testify.
Well, okay, let's get to it already.
And a
I
lot
think
of
they
people
should.
have testified already. So, it's, again, it's going to be like, well, why isn't Merrick Garland doing anything? Well, actually, he did. And maybe he took his time and he was careful because he doesn't want it to backfire.
That could be. Right. I also liked Marcy Wheeler's theory, reminding us that there was not really, there wasn't a U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia confirmed and in office for most of this time. And he was sworn in a week ago Friday, and by the end of his first week on the job, had in fact brought this
It
indictment.
took him a whole week. What's
Yeah.
going on? Why is it so
mean,
slow? Justice is so slow in this
They
country.
probably that probably had something to do with it. I was glad to have that comment and remind everybody of it. And then on Friday, and then poof, there you go. That took care of it. All we have to do is read the facts of the situation out on the air on Fridays. You got to wait till Fridays for things to happen.
So would the same person be responsible for Meadows should the
Yes.
House go that far? Right now, there's Meadows. They want Meadows'
Everybody
testimony.
likely.
So they're still kind of negotiating with him a little bit on that.
I don't know.
So they sent the warning shots, and then we'll see what happens. Meadows hasn't been cited for contempt yet. Another point that I saw raised, lots of complaints. Well, why is this criminal contempt? Why isn't it inherent contempt? Isn't there a jail cell in the basement of the Capitol? And why doesn't the House just take over and do what they need to do on their own recognizance so that they don't have to be so dependent upon slow people in justice?
That's a good question.
And the simple answer is, if it was inherent contempt and the House was solely responsible for administering it, then the House would be solely responsible for adjudicating it.
Yes.
And that means a show trial in the House with Jim Jordan et al. And is that really what you want?
Me.
Yeah, I asked
thinking
you
about
because,
that.
you're the expert. I just read
might
this stuff
want
and
that,
ask
and
questions.
I don't
I'm just
think
asking
it's
questions
smart.
and doing the research.
Yeah.
So, what's the
Okay.
story here?
Well, I don't know. Do your own research. That's what they say. This is science.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Some part of me wants that trial because I feel like you'll end up holding Jim Jordan in inherent contempt in the middle of the trial.
You still
but-
may because he was a witness.
Yeah, that's true too. I think it's best
What
to
happens in the House if you have that
do it
trial,
this
but you're
way,
a witness?
unfortunately. Nothing. I mean, what should happen is
Exactly nothing.
you would be right. You'd be excluded from sitting on the jury certainly, and he won't be the end.
Right.
So.
So that's why inherent contempt doesn't look nearly as appetizing now as it did before I read that.
Well, that's true. It would be a fun thing, but yeah. Also, it was never really in the cards, just because that's the fallback from when regular contempt procedures just don't or can't work. Like as in when you have a Republican, if Trump's still in office and they just refuse
And
to prosecute.
I have to tell you honestly, this is where political intimidation comes in.
Oh, good. We're going to do that.
Because if I thought I was going to win the House, I'd want that trial. And if I thought I was going to lose the House, maybe not. Because I'm not that interested in firing up their voters.
Okay. Yeah, that's something too. That really would be an interesting episode, though. And but yeah, I guess if you're thinking, well, with proper handling and messaging, the Democrats could come away triumphant.
I rest my case, right?
Yes.
So, and I'm not even a lawyer.
Yeah.
Here's a overall piece, which I thought was pretty good, from Stephen Beschloss. Right. Crime, Justice, and Surviving Belief in Governance. 4 major stories offer a picture of 2 different versions of America. And he starts, of course, with the Kenosha case and Kyle Rittenhouse, who will probably get off on everything, partly because that's the way the law is written, and less so because of the judge. Now, the judge's instructions to the jury are probably going to decide the case, I would think, as a layperson, I would say. But the defense lawyers in Wisconsin who work with this particular judge say that, yeah, he's a bit of a nutter, all judges are. At the same time, he's very consistent about one thing. He's really a defense lawyer judge. He tends to give breaks to the defense consistently, evenly. Really? I mean, he's got a reputation for that. Every defense lawyer in Wisconsin who's written about it says that's what he does. And so they're not surprised about a single thing they've seen about the Rittenhouse case with him in charge.
How interesting. Yeah, I mean, for public education purposes, they should cover him just dealing with a normal trial and show that. That might surprise everybody.
Weak on crime.
Would not have guessed that. And I don't know whether I believe it.
But that being the case, you can sort of guess what's going to happen there.
Yeah, all right.
Right.
Sure.
Now, he goes on to, it's hard to think of anyone who provides a more vivid example of the notion of criminal contempt than Steve Bannon. Anybody besides Trump who's urged his operatives to stonewall Congress. Despite a subpoena, Bannon refused to cooperate with the House Select Committee investigating January 6th, which we call the January 6th Committee. And he refused to turn over requested documents. Again, reminder, this is a reminder to myself, not being a lawyer, it's not built into me to know these things. Okay. You can plead the fifth about your testimony, but you can't plead the fifth about your documents.
Yes. Right.
You don't have to when you're asked to turn them over, you have to turn them over.
Yeah. True. Okay. Right. You don't have to testify.
You go there and say, well, I plead the fifth, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. And you could try to seek privilege for your documents, but not Fifth Amendment.
But you can't plead the fifth.
Right.
Serving up an already court-refuted excuse that he's executive privilege, contempt of Congress, is a misdemeanor offense that carries a maximum punishment of 1 year in jail and a maximum fine of $1,000. 2 counts means 2 years, I guess, max, which you don't usually get. The 2 charges against the Trump advisor who said on January 5th that all hell is going to break loose tomorrow are the second time he's been criminally charged in the last 15 months. The 67-year-old Bannon was charged with defrauding donors in the We Build the Wall scam last August, but never faced trial after Trump pardoned him. And it's hard to see how this right-wing extremist, who sees himself as an anti-democratic revolutionary, won't use this latest spotlight to raise more money for himself and burnish his reputation as a political martyr, expect him to be all smiles, sneering, and defiant. But, there you go. And yet you have that contrasted with Rittenhouse. Basically, you have a country, he says, awash with guns and self-styled militiamen. And, whether or not he gets off on self-defense laws, which are written to favor the defendant, the question of what were you doing there in the first place, unfortunately, is not part of the trial.
Right.
Like, what motivated you to get a gun and go cross state lines and show up in a community that wasn't yours, claiming that it was your job to protect everybody? Well, that's not a crime.
Right. It's just silly and foolish and dangerous.
Right.
I mean, sort of thing you would like to criminalize, but can't really figure out a way to do.
The comment of one Wisconsin defense attorney underlines the whole sad tragedy, and his decision to go to Kenosha. There's no rational reason why a 17-year-old should cross state lines, arm himself with a long gun, lie about being an EMT, and then try to play vigilante throughout this incredibly dangerous and chaotic time.
Okay. That's all true.
Right?
And yet.
All right, and then move on to another big story of the day. While 13 GOP House members who voted in support of the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill faced death threats and attacks as traitors from some of their fellow Republicans. And by the way, I guess the latest is McCarthy doesn't have the guts to do anything about it, so they're going to keep their committee assignments.
Well, there's nothing to do.
President Biden, Democrats, and a host of others will be celebrating its passage today on the South Lawn of the White House. According to the White House, the ceremony will include a diverse group of leaders who fought for its passage. I guess Mitch McConnell won't be there because, he can't acknowledge that there's some cooperation here.
Right. Okay.
Even though a bipartisan group of 10 Senate lawmakers wrote the bill.
Yes. But.
Right. The infrastructure bill passed before finalizing the larger $2 trillion Build Back Better social and climate bill. After 5 moderate Democrats gave assurances to progressives they would vote for it later with conditions. Whether a vote will happen, because one of the conditions is in no event later than the week of November 15th. And when that'll happen or not remains unclear because the Congressional Budget Office is doing scoring piecemeal.
Yes, okay.
But today and in the coming days, we should see whether the cost and the measures to pay for them will satisfy the still intransigent Democrats, including Manchin and Sinema. But that's a different story, different vote. That's in the Senate. So governance is often ugly, often frustrating, and infuriating when it reveals the fractures in perspective that fail to recognize and address the real needs of Americans. It's made worse by a 50-50 Senate split with Republicans who refuse to participate in legislation. At least he gets it right.
Hey, who is that?
This is Steve Beschloss.
Okay, right.
But at a time when the country is confronted by the arrogance of extremists who relish violence and hunger to destroy democracy, the commitment to governance remains a reason for optimism and a crucial counterpoint. So, as I said on Friday when Bannon was indicted, the Democrats have decided to fight fire with a fire department.
Okay, well, that's the usual method. I mean,
that's actually a good plan. So
technocratic version, right? Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, isn't it, that the other side is probably more excited about the old saying of fighting fire with fire. But I actually thinking about that, it seems like there would just be more fire at the end, don't you think?
Well, that's what they want.
Yeah, well, that's true. So no wonder it's so popular with them. All right, well, at least Beschloss got that right. That's very gratifying to hear him say that, just like you said. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. All right, well, choosing new direction for the second half. I've just seen your message over the break. Okay, very interesting. But where were we when we were focused? Ah, yes, right, on Steve Beschloss having gotten it right and made a point of stating the case correctly about who's doing what and blocking legislative progress, reminding everybody that, Republicans are refusing to participate at all, and that's bad, and you should keep it in mind at all times.
Right. Neocon, but never Trumper. Max Boot has an interesting column about...
All right, Boot.
Former Defense Secretary Mark Esper.
Okay.
Who became known, as he says, as Yesper for accommodating Trump too much. But Jonathan Karl's new book says, you know what, there's some interesting stuff in here that maybe should make you reconsider. Or at least I wouldn't reconsider Jesper at all, but I would reconsider, just how bad the Trump people were. And whatever you thought, they were worse.
Oh, I don't like to be outdone there.
A newly disclosed memo reveals Trump's plot to turn the military into his personal goon squad is the title of the piece.
Of course.
And Max Boot starts off and says, I want to apologize to Mark Esper, former President Donald Trump's fourth and second to last defense secretary. I may have been too harsh on the man who became known as Jesper. As I noted in March, he didn't vocally protest pardons for war criminals, the use of defense budget to build a border wall, or the withdrawal of troops from Germany. But now that we have seen fresh evidence of how much Trump and his henchmen loathe Esper, he's rising in my estimation.
Oh.
And this comes courtesy of ABC News reporter Jonathan Karl, who's unearthed a memorandum from Johnny McEntee, Trump's director of presidential personnel. And by the way, one of those you didn't remember his name who might get subpoenaed people.
Yeah,
listing 14 reasons for ousting Esper. That document was dated October 19, 2020, and 3 weeks later Esper was canned. The very premise of McEntee's memo was both sinister and ludicrous. A 30-year-old of no professional or intellectual distinction whose path to power was carrying Trump's bags was making the case for getting rid of a senior cabinet officer for insufficient loyalty.
That's
true.
true.
McEntee's the 30-year-old of no professional or intellectual distinction. This revealing and chilling document deserves to be read not as a historical curiosity, but as a terrible portent of what could be in store if Trump wins another term. He appears determined to turn the military into his personal goon squad. One of the first complaints is Esper had approved the promotion of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. The next item was he publicly opposed the president's direction to utilize American force to put down riots just outside the White House. That was Esper's decision, which Max Boot calls a brave decision. In June 2020, to resist Trump's desires to deploy active troops to suppress Black Lives Matter protests, Esper acted after he and Mark Milley had been lured by Trump into a bizarre photo op in Lafayette Square. And then McEntee further indicted Esper for acting to remove a symbol of racism and sedition, the Confederate flag, from military installations.
Right.
He was upset that the defense secretary ruled out attacks on cultural sites in Iran if the conflict escalated. He criticized Esper for spending too much time focused on competition with Russia.
Oh.
Right.
That's sort of traditional.
Insufficient support for Trump's discriminatory transgender ban, contradicting the president and seal Eddie Gallagher's case.
Mm-hmm.
And the most damning and telling grievance against Esper was near the bottom. He assumed the role and vowed to be apolitical.
Oh, well, no wonder you can't be, can't be traditional or follow the rules.
Right. So he was really, he should be fired because he wasn't apolitical. So, in other words, Trump tried to destroy the professional apolitical ethos of the armed forces, and if given the opportunity, he almost certainly will do so again. Now, that fits in with what we were talking about in terms of gas prices and Democrats running against themselves now, but running against this when you actually have a Republican. And so you could say this now, and it doesn't have any salience. But you could say this in terms of, okay, and do you support this to the guy you're running against or the woman you're running against? And all of a sudden it does. So, that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to look at the environment now and say, okay, well, I know what this means in 2022 and 2024. Well, no, you don't, because you don't know who you're running against and what kind of campaign you're going to run.
Yeah, that's true. And, you can this will be considered by some to be old news when the election season rolls around, but it can be renewed by people asking the candidates, what do you think of this? Just as we saw.
Especially in 2022, because in 2022, you can't rule Trump off the ticket. You might be able to by 2024 if circumstances go that way.
Yes.
But in 2022, you can say, look, Trump will be running. This is what he did. What do you think about that? No weaseling.
Yeah, you could give it a shot. And I mean, it's not like you can't generate a story on it. We spent all of the end of the week about on the story of Jonathan Karl's tape of having asked Trump, what about that hanging thing, which was certainly old news by the time we heard the tape. And it was old news by the time he asked Trump that. I mean, according to the Chuck Todds of the world, old news. We should never have gotten past it.
Yeah, but the January 6th committee, is going to make it new news. So again, the Bannon indictment all of a sudden brings all those stories to the fore and said, well, this is actually current news.
Mm-hmm. That's true. All right, so I'm excited about that prospect. And we just in time spent Wednesday, Thursday, Friday talking about Johnny McEntee in the second half of the show. So I think people have at least heard his name and heard a little bit about what a jackass he is. Yeah. It was all set up. We were reading.
Your last
Jonathan
three
Karl.
shows were all set up so I could have this throwaway comment about Johnny McEntee. It was great.
There's nothing. The only thing that should be thrown away is the key, my friend.
To Johnny McEntee's cell down in the basement of the Capitol. So we'll see.
Yes, that.
I think for the rest of my segment, we're going to turn a little bit to the pandemic here.
All right. We should throw that away.
I think there's some major issues going on, and I think some clarity would be helpful.
How? Now? All right.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
do it.
Okay. For example, Harry Enton writes in
Here's Harry
CNN today.
Okay.
Got it confused with Harwood writing for a
Right.
moment because I forgot who did which story. Harry writes, flu shots uptake is now partisan.
Hooray.
It didn't used to be.
No.
Now listen to that phrase. It didn't used to be.
Right.
Did you
Okay.
look at the story?
I am looking for the story. Yes, I
How
will.
would you spell that? It
Uh,
didn't used to be.
I don't know. Oh gosh, where is the story? How come I?
No. Do it without seeing the
All
story.
right.
How would you spell it? It didn't used to be.
It didn't used to be.
How would you spell that?
Used to be. USEDTO.
No,
No,
that's not proper usage.
it isn't.
It didn't used to be is USE to be.
Is that right?
Didn't used to be because, for example, did you make your breakfast or was it already made?
What?
Let's say you had cereal.
Let's say that. And
Okay.
Then, yes.
Did you bake it this morning?
Bake the cereal? No.
Or stir fry it or anything?
No.
Well, then you didn't cook it.
Right.
You wouldn't say I didn't cooked it.
Ah.
And
All
so
right.
it didn't used to be isn't the proper form.
Well, okay. That's
It didn't used to be is USE TOBE. The reason it's not a controversy mostly is because when people say it, they say it, and you don't know how it's spelled, and it all sounds the same.
Right. That's true. Well, we have that problem with a lot of things. And sometimes then it gets so ubiquitous that they just say, all right, enough. That's okay. We can use that because it looks funny.
So I saw the headline,
Use
flu shots uptake is now partisan. It didn't used to be, and I thought, is that right? And I looked it up, and it turns out, yeah, it is.
Okay. I didn't. All right. You know what? It's funny. The big graphic goes to the article you looked up on used to be, and the CNN article for some reason didn't generate a picture.
CNN articles don't generate pictures.
Oh,
Whenever
really?
you have a CNN
That
article
doesn't seem
on
right.
Skype, when I send them to you, that's why I always include the headline because
Okay.
it just doesn't generate a picture.
Yeah, that's weird. They should work on
It is
that.
weird. It's one of those things, behind
Okay,
the scenes
it didn't use
crosstalk there.
to be. It didn't
So
use-
Harry Enton notes that if you look at flu shot uptake around the country, it's about what it usually is.
usually. No, that's a different word.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. All right. Okay. It's about what it is usually used to be.
Yeah.
All right.
You see,
But
you
now-
could say used to be, that's a D, but it didn't used to be is not D.
Okay.
So the reason that
Oh.
the flu shot uptake is about the same is because Democrats are getting the flu shot with their COVID shot. And so Democrat flu shots are up and Republican flu shots are down. And they're
All right.
paralleling now for the first time, which is
Excellent.
not a good thing, by the way.
No, I mean,
the partisan
bad.
split on
yes,
COVID
right.
shots.
But yes, good. Yeah. Get your flu shot because Republicans will give you the flu unless you do. And then if you don't get your flu shot, you won't be able to, quietly, secretly celebrate when they get it.
So CNN notes, take a look at two recent polls that have asked about whether or not people have gotten the flu shot, Axios, Ipsos, and Kaiser Family. By assessing two polls instead of one, we know what we're seeing is real and not statistical noise. According to the Ipsos data, 68% of Democrats say they've gotten a flu shot or are very likely to. 44% of Republicans said the same. That 24-point gap is similar to the 30-point gap for COVID-19 vaccine. Kaiser, clear majority, 65% of Democrats indicated they've received or will definitely receive the flu shot, and 40% of Republicans. And the 25-point partisan gap for flu is a near carbon copy of the 24-point gap for Ipsos poll. Now compare this data to what we saw in past years. In February 2020, 58% of Democrats and 54% of Republicans would get a flu shot, just for example. And 55% of Democrats and 53% of Republicans would get a flu shot in 2020 from Princeton Survey Research. So there was no partisan gap in previous years. There is this year. And you won't see it in the data because they cancel each other out.
Okay.
Republicans down, Democrats up, and fine. The worry, of course, and again, why you can't look at what happened in Virginia and say this is what's going to happen to the rest of the country. when things like this happen, there's spillover from COVID shots to flu shots, from flu shots to measles shots. So whether or not vaccination in school and vaccine mandates in school for the usual childhood vaccinations is going to be used by the anti-vax people as a reason to get rid of all school vaccine mandates isn't even a question.
That.
You know they're going to try.
Yes.
The question is, will they succeed? And in order for them to succeed, they have to control the school boards, and that becomes a school board election issue, which if you don't make it an issue or only one side makes it an issue, they win. But if you make it an issue, since most people don't agree with that, they lose.
Okay. So don't ignore it. Make it an issue.
So don't ignore it, make it an issue. Exactly right.
All right.
So for all the Democratic consultants who say, no, don't talk about this, you only empower, it's stupid, it's ridiculous. That's why when we told CDC years ago, decades ago, do not ignore the anti-vaxxers, they're not just a few loud voices. If you don't take proactive steps to counter the nonsense, you're going to be in big trouble. And that's what happened. So I absolutely positively am not in the school of, if you mention them, you help them.
I see.
And that's why I always get annoyed when people say, well, you shouldn't retweet that because you only empower. Well, fine. If you want to take a screenshot so that they don't get a link, okay. I don't really think that matters. But if you think it does, great. But you can't ignore stuff just because you don't want to think about it.
I
don't
can
like
see
the
how
person
that would
who
work.
said it.
Right. And you'll want to make this an issue. You'll want to do it in a certain way, and that's...
Don't say thank you, Brandon, and make fun of them. You're only empowering them. That's bullshit.
I think so.
Make fun of them.
All right. Well, I'm always for that. And so I'm okay. I'm okay with making fun. I'm almost always going to cooperate with that. I can't think of an instance where I wouldn't approve of that.
Right.
But,
so here's some more technical stuff about the pandemic. This one is interesting. Jeffrey Dushin, who I think is one of the best public health communicators and experts in the country, is in Seattle, King County.
Okay. Am I supposed to ignore his name?
Many talking about return to normal with COVID-19 based on comparison with seasonal influenza. Be thread for discussion purposes with CDC data.
All right.
Over the past 11 flu seasons, the estimated average U.S. peak hospitalization rate per 100,000 people per week is about 5.2.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. And peak U.S. hospitalization, same thing, 100,000 people per week for COVID. Winter was 20.6 and spring was 12.3.
Okay. I like spring better.
Yeah, but even spring was way higher for COVID than flu. Seasonal flu hospitalization rates are greater than 1 per 100,000 per 7-day period for about 12 to 18 weeks a year, sometimes less.
Okay, so
and since
case.
March, the U.S. COVID hospitalization rate's been elevated above peak flu hospitalization rate for about 64 out of 85 weeks.
But for COVID,
or about 75% of the time. So his reminder is flu season lasts about 3 months, and COVID season lasts around 3/4 of the year.
Yeah, right. More if you're out hunting deer now, I understand. So.
Right.
I don't know.
So if we use flu hospitalization and death rates as a benchmark for what's a manageable burden of COVID, how do we incorporate peak and cumulative incidence when COVID is ongoing, hasn't been established in terms of predictable periodicity, and severity of illness and length of hospital stay are different? And what are the implications for the healthcare system preparedness of ongoing intermittent or seasonal COVID outbreaks added to the burden of seasonal flu and other respiratory diseases? In other words, when these things hit, if they overwhelm your hospital, it's a big deal, even well above and beyond what it's doing to the individuals who happen to be getting it. So the whole movement is saying, okay, well, let's, we're getting back to normal, when in fact right now we are not. And you're overthinking it and you're overcautious. Well, Arizona, Michigan, places like that are actually having their hospitals overwhelmed right now.
Darn it.
And so, no, it's not over.
Yeah.
So this comes from a very influential newsletter from Dave Leonhardt from the New York Times. How does this end? Thinking about COVID and normalcy. And he talks about Bob Wachter, who's actually one of the great specialists from San Francisco, internist, chair of the medicine department, UCSF. Worries about the downsides of organizing our lives around COVID. In recent weeks, he's begun to think about when most of life's rhythms should start returning to normal. Increasingly, he believes the answer is now. Like most viruses, it'll probably keep circulating, but we have the tools to turn it into a manageable virus similar to seasonal flu. Again, Jeff Dushin just pointed out, this is not similar to seasonal flu. Given this reality, Wachter, who's 64, has decided to resume more of his old activities. And again, the article talks about, well, maybe it's time to get back to normal. And that did not sit well with a lot of the medical community. Megan Ranney, public health person, says, can we stop with the mission accomplished BS? The world is different, but COVID isn't gone, and too many people are still unvaccinated. So the path forward is personal risk mitigation and community action, which includes vaccination, ventilation, testing, and masking. I see a lot of people who want to, quote, get back to normal are starting to fight over, should schools still be masking children? But they tend to skip the fact that vaccination in children, and even though we just reached 1 million this week for 5 to 12-year-olds, has just started.
There are so many more.
And still takes a couple of weeks to get everything on board. 2 shots, right. Plus 2 weeks after that for immunity. None of these discussions are talking about whether the schools have gotten around to actually ventilating better. None of them are talking about the fact that even with new treatments, we talked about this last week, that are available by mouth for early COVID, which is a wonderful thing. It's only effective if you know you have it, and therefore being able to test is a key part of that. So when she says vaccinate, ventilate, test, and mask, those are the non-pharmaceutical interventions that can make a difference. Saline Grounder adds, as a society, we need to have a conversation about how to transition from the emergency phase to the endemic phase, but that doesn't mean throwing up our hands and accepting death, because we've plateaued. We haven't dropped.
Okay, right.
All right, Dara Cass, who's an ER doc. These hot takes need to stop, especially when they're published the week 5 to 11-year-olds just start getting vaccinated. Soon enough, highly vaxxed low-case communities will return to normal. Duh. But not now.
All right, so a couple more weeks.
Yeah. Basically, what they're saying is, look, we have holidays coming up. People are getting together, Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving. Have this discussion after the holidays. It's not time to have it now. But I want a normal Thanksgiving. Well, you can't have one. Uche Blackstock, we can all agree we all want this pandemic to end, but with 2,100 COVID-19 deaths just yesterday, we should be looking to our local, state, and federal leaders to effectively prevent the next surge. And Angela Rasmussen, which precautions should stay and which should go? Many experts have many opinions on this, but you should know that David Linhart is not one of them. Actual experts, responsible journalists don't cherry-pick quotes and data to justify the conclusion they want to be true. So I said it didn't get a great reception. That's what I meant.
Yeah, well, you're not kidding. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, this is a great chance to not have a normal Thanksgiving. I mean, last year even better, but this year,
well, introverts are very happy about it.
Yeah, well, that's one thing, right? And you always, everyone always complains. I don't think I've ever really found this the case, but lots of people like to complain, or at least pretend that they have some crazy relatives with whom they can have no civil political discussion. And this year you can have a vaccinated Thanksgiving and not have them, I guess. I mean, why not take advantage of that opportunity? If the kids aren't vaccinated, all right, well, that's a different story. And yeah, I know everybody will want to get back to normal, but right. So get the vaccines in the arms and then get the second vaccines in and then wait 2 weeks and wait
and
until
then
millions and millions.
Because you got to wait anyway. Why don't you take a look at your school and see what they're doing with ventilation?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's almost impossible because, of course, all the money for ventilation will have been stripped out over the past couple of years as you defunded CRT or whatever it was you thought you were doing.
And deep clean schools. But, who's responsible for that? School boards. And how do you fix that? Elections. You got issues that you can run on, folks.
Yeah, that's true, right? You can absolutely do that, and don't ignore those things, and don't take the advice of people who say that you should, because you can get there and say, remember, this is about education, and you're talking about putting woefully uneducated people in charge of your children's education. And also, you should probably keep in mind, their end goal is to drive everyone out of the public education system.
Well, you have a choice, I mean, it's a very clear election here. One side wants to burn books, and the other side wants to ventilate the schools better to avoid pandemics.
Yes, we would like to have that open. And by the way, all the people with the signs and let the kids breathe. Are there? I mean, has anybody been
let
collecting?
The kids breathe. There's common ground. Ventilate the damn schools.
Right. Let them breathe some fresh air, and let them, for now, breathe it through masks, I guess. Has there been a lot of people collecting those stories of all the kids passing out and having learning difficulties because they something carbon dioxide.
It's
I haven't
hard
seen
to
it.
collect because they don't
Fair enough.
exist.
It's weird. I mean, I find the stories of the kids that accidentally shoot themselves all the time. They swear that didn't happen, but I see it in the newspaper. Where are the stories of the kids passing out? Or the surgeons passing out, for that matter? No.
And then finally,
we're
Eric
crazy.
Topol has
That's
a nice
the
little
answer.
thread here addressing the anti-vaxxer BS about vaccines not preventing transmission. It's not all or nothing, or as he puts it in a binary, it's not 0 or 1.
Oh, well, that'll only confuse people, but okay.
Right?
We'll get it. We get it. I got a lot of computer people here.
Right, exactly. Yes.
It's not 0 or 1. It's
Right.
something else. That's not really the answer, but okay. I don't know.
Well, it's there's two kinds of people in this world: those who get that binary joke and those who don't. So, recent Dutch studies during Delta
that's
effectiveness of full vaccination of the index against transmission to unvaccinated household contacts.
Okay.
And household contacts would be your greatest risk. Effectiveness of full vaccination, 63%.
Against transmission.
Against transmission in
Kids
your
are
own
unvaccinated
household.
still. Right.
Right?
Okay.
If you have an unvaccinated household contact and you have it because you didn't get vaccinated, well, if you do get vaccinated, you could cut your transmission rate by 63%. Another UK study with Delta, 38%. So he points out fully vaccinated status reduces Delta transmission with Delta for household contacts, the worst case scenario. That reduction range is from 27 to 63% in these studies. Transmission reduction outside of households is likely considerably higher, but difficult to quantify. Because you can test everybody in the house. You can't test everybody in the street that you passed.
You could try, but they'll probably
Right.
think you're bothering them. Yeah, all right. Well, but, the number's not
so
great,
the
but it's
vaccines
better than
work.
nothing.
They wane over time. Tony Fauci is now starting to talk about that. He had a New York Times podcast, which the anti-vaxxers are jumping on. Oh, the effectiveness wanes over time. That proves it didn't work in the first place. No.
Or that's the way medicine always kind of has been.
Right. And again, I fault the messaging from the beginning. This is what we know. Things are going to change over time. You should say that every single time you present this. If you were used to saying it every time, then you wouldn't need to say it now. Oh, well, now they're changing their tune because now they're saying that things change over time.
I don't know.
It was always true.
I
But
guess
the fact of the
you're
matter is, Fauci is saying that
anti-vax.
it's probably a good case to be made for boosters for everybody, but that'll come in full time as we get more information. And, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the direction we're going. And so some states like Colorado, New Mexico, and California have already said, thank you, FDA and CDC, but we're giving boosters to anybody who asks.
Yes. All right. Well, I don't know how. I feel about
Over
that,
18
but
anyway.
okay. Sure. I'll go to those
So
states,
if you want a
yes.
booster, get a booster. And in California, you can. Here in Connecticut, I got one because I'm old enough, and other people would have to show underlying conditions. But Colorado and New Mexico and California may, in fact, be the direction the rest of the country is going to go. In fact, there's stories that officials at the federal level are certainly considering letting anybody who wants to get a vaccine booster get a vaccine booster because the downside is so small and the upside so big. And by the way, that's what Biden wanted to do originally, but the data wasn't there to support it.
But now?
And
not
now there's
yet.
better data about the fact that the original vaccine preventiveness is waning.
All right. Well, I'd like to get one. And remember, Ron DeSantis was a genius, apparently, for just letting anybody who wanted to, even out-of-state people, come in and take the vaccine there. I'm wondering where he is on boosters, why he isn't passing those out for free also. I mean, everyone was worried about him, the way he was giving out the vaccines.
A lot of people died in Florida based on the way he did it, so I wouldn't use him as a model of how to do it.
I'm just wondering,
I'm just saying.
I'm saying that if you criticize, which you didn't, California allowing people to just come in and, not to necessarily come in from out of state, but just get the booster if they want to. I assume that Republicans would storm and steam and stomp their feet, all the S words that I can think of about that, because it's happening in California. But I don't know. For some reason, it was heroics in Florida, except it was with the initial vaccine and ended up screwing things up. But booster sounds like anybody should be able to get it. So go get it. All right. I can take that. I don't know what else to say about that one, but I am curious to see where DeSantis lands on distributing what boosters get shipped to Florida, if we're even tracking that stuff
and then what
anymore.
Trump says about him.
Yeah, right. He's a rhino. Well, now he'll start to become a rhino because he's probably thinking of running for president. Maybe at the same time.
Speaking of thinking of running for president, there was a whole bunch of stories about Chris Christie.
Oh, yes.
For reasons
Why
which
did
I
that
do not
happen?
understand. Christie said something along the lines of, Trump is awful, Trump is terrible, Trump is
I
not the
agree
way the
with
country should go. Of course, if he wins the nomination, I'll probably support him.
Right, yeah. Try to serve as his chief of staff again.
And people were trying to remind the public that Chris Christie has always been a windbag blowhard.
Yes, he was
and
the original.
And here's the proof right here.
Right.
If you didn't remember the George Washington Bridge, remember this.
Yeah. He ended up losing the nomination because his act got stolen. He was the original windbag blowhard and didn't figure on a bigger one entering the race. My lane got stolen. I wonder if I could serve him as a lick spittle.
Anyway, that's my segment for today.
Okay, or it used to be anyway.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
It's over.
Right. Oh, so now we can say it used to be, or
Yeah.
it didn't. All right. Well, okay. I learned something, and I learned something about the grammar as well. And I keep thinking about what is it? The one that cooked it. I didn't cook
Yeah.
it, but I would say I wasn't the one that cooked it. I would say it that way instead.
Yeah.
Get rid of these things. Okay. Well, thank you. That's interesting, and I wasn't expecting the show to go in that direction.
Neither was I until I saw the headline and said,
That's
hey,
so
if
fun.
you see it as opposed
Okay.
to hear it, you have a very different impression of what the heck is this.
Yeah, well, that happens a lot, and there's a lot of phrases like that, and that's one I haven't thought about. And the other ones I'm tired of, so this was good to have a new one. And all right, well, we'll check in with you again on Wednesday. I will read your the castle story that you sent me. You want
The
to say that
castle
for
story
Wednesday?
from Connecticut is a weird one. But
Yeah.
I'll leave that for David. All right, I'll
Okay.
talk to you on Wednesday.
Very good. Okay, thanks very much. And all right, we'll continue on as though we didn't learn all of what we learned about Donald Trump fomenting insurrection. We'll just continue on as though things were normal. See you on Wednesday. I appreciate it. And we'll be back after this 1 minute break to tell you about all the things that I just said I was going to talk about. All of the things, all the ways in which Donald Trump still, we're learning more abnormalities about this guy. Welcome back now to Kagro in the Morning Show here on Nerds Radio. All right, well, I'll hold this thing in reserve here, but Greg was sharing with me, I guess, with that must have been the talk of Weekend Zillow, if you are one of the people that follows Twitter denizen Stephen Dennis, who usually is focusing on congressional matters during the week, but makes a hobby of touring ridiculous-looking homes on Zillow on the weekends and sharing what he finds. Finding this would be the Saturday night Zillow. It's as distinct from Friday night Zillow, I guess. But the very weird-looking Chris Mark Castle in Woodstock, Connecticut. There are Woodstocks all over the place, apparently, and Connecticut's got one no different from everybody else. But this one contains some bizarro castle of some kind, and there's apparently a hell of a story behind it. But I think we'll have to review it off the air at some point and decide how much time to spend on it on the air, because there's so many other bizarre stories that we really should catch up with. And wow, okay, let's see. Where were we with the pocket items and weekend Twitter? Let's see. Okay. One story just to bring us up to speed on things. Raw story reporting this because, for us, for our purposes, because it was actually reported in the Wall Street Journal, and I can't get there from here. So we'll depend on Sarah Burris to bring us the story via Raw story, as we frequently do with things even when they're not behind paywalls. Trump will sell his D.C. hotel. We were just talking about the D.C. hotel and why. Well, I was wondering about why the insurrection war room was at the Willard Hotel instead of the Trump Hotel. No real answer there. Don't think this has anything to do with it, but a good story about why he would be doing it is in here too. Trump will sell his D.C. hotel to Hilton after losing millions in profits. So I'm not entirely sure from that headline exactly what's going on financially, but I think it gets unwound here. Former President Donald Trump has a $170 million bank loan coming due in 2024 from Deutsche Bank, of all places. Did you know that? This is, of course, for the Washington, D.C. property. But according to the Wall Street Journal, Trump has found a way out. He's selling it to Hilton. And that would be a good idea at this point. Trump leased the hotel for $250,000 a month for the next 60 years, but that lease will be broken with the agreement to fork over the property after years of profit losses. Profit losses? I don't know if I understand the terminology here. It might be mixing our terms. But anyway, it's not a metaphor. This is actual profits and losses. Trump signed the lease on August 25th, the great day, of course, 2013, and began developing it in 2014, which would mean he would pay about $3 million a year for a total of $24 million. He also got $40 million in government tax credits for the hotel. He pledged to spend $200 million in developing it, and it's unclear how much operations cost for the hotel. While the Wall Street Journal reported that the hotel generated $150 million in revenue over the 4 years of Trump's presidency, it doesn't appear that revenue was enough to cover the operations and interest payments on the Deutsche Bank loan. According to Forbes, the property has been struggling to make money for years. Operating profits, measured as earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, for the 12 months ending August 31st, 2017, appeared to be negative $4.3 million. I've already lost, but the idea that it's negative, that at least resonates with me. I understand that. What am I reading again? Operating profits, negative $4.3 million, according to an analysis of the financial documents released by the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. The next year, things improved. We were talking about 2017, 16 to 17. The next year, things improved, but the Trumps still only squeezed out $900,000 of operating profits on $52.3 million in revenue, and they lost money after paying interest on their debt. After that, the property bled more, $2.1 million on an operating basis. Things got worse when COVID struck. Oh, good. In the year that ended August 31st, 2020, the hotel produced an operating loss of $8.6 million. There are a lot of ways to lose money every year that don't require investing $370 million up front. I guess that's according to the Forbes analysis. A report from Washington Post reporter David Farenthold last week revealed that the D.C. hotel isn't Trump's only problem. Many of his properties, there we are, are hemorrhaging money. It was losing millions and millions of dollars, Farenthold told the Post podcast on Wednesday. That's why we didn't. Okay. I was like, I remember Farenthold saying something like this. Why did we ignore it for a week? And it was because he did it on a podcast, not in an article that we could read. And it would be unfair for us to just roll the tape of Farenthold's podcast. You should go listen to his podcast instead, if you want to do that. Anyway, but now we have some quotes. I think they recognize that you cannot make it in Washington, especially with as expensive a hotel as that is. Phew. As big of a loan as that hotel has. You can't make it on one slice of the pie. You can't make it just on Republicans. I guess those would be the only people, opting to stay there. It's not enough, he said. To make that kind of hotel at that luxury level work in Washington, you need everybody. You need embassies. You need conventions. You can't have a polarized audience. So that's them admitting we can't make this work. It's the kind of place that could do really well. It's got a great location, but not with the Trump name. Okay. Probably correct. And anyway, now you're up to speed on that. Not that you were going to the Trump Hotel anytime soon, but if you were wondering, what's the fate of the place? Will it be around if Trump were to run for office? Would he keep it because it's a way of bringing in illicit profits? But I guess if they're not really coming in, why would he keep it? And if he doesn't keep it, then I don't know. I'm not certain. Or is it the secret behind whether or not he's really going to run. Like, if he can't come to Washington and capitalize on it with the hotel, does he really go through with it? Or are there other ways that he can capitalize on things, and the hotel, he'll just jettison and he'll use some other property to launder the money? I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, that's a piece of the puzzle out there, and maybe we can work it out logically over the coming weeks and see if it means anything. All right, let's see. There's more. There was another memo, as it turns out, from the Trump inner circle outlining how Pence, they said, could overturn the election. This, I guess, also in Jonathan Karl's book, and, another of the shoes that they're dropping. This one, not from John Eastman, but and it's funny. I don't know why they accepted these memos from anybody, but John Eastman, I guess, had a reputation that you might say, I'll read an Eastman memo on this. But apparently this one comes from Jenna Ellis, which you would be forgiven for saying, I'm not going to read her memo. She doesn't know anything about this. She's a traffic court attorney at best. All right. But who knows? She styles herself a constitutional expert. Hey, so do I. Not really, but, you can do that if you're actually smart and you have, a reputation for having the intellectual capacity to read and absorb the material and then analyze it and give us something to go on afterwards. But Jenna Ellis doesn't really have that. Here's what she did. ABC News reporting this one, of course, because that's where Jonathan Karl is, but it's Libby Cathy putting this story together in a memo not made public until now. Dun, dun, dun. I don't know. Then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows emailed to Vice President Mike Pence's top aide. Okay. On New Year's. All right. I get it. It's a weird construction. But okay. A memo is not made public until now. And the memo, I guess, at some point got emailed from Mark Meadows to Pence's top aide on New Year's Eve. This memo also detailed a plan for undoing President Joe Biden's election victory, just as Eastman's did. The memo, written by former President Donald Trump's campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis, is reported for the first time in Karl's upcoming book, Betrayal, here's the whole title, demonstrating how Pence was under even more pressure than previously known to overturn the results of the 2020 election. I mean, I guess so. There were two memos pressuring him instead of one. Even more pressure, but no indication so far. Well, we'll read on. I mean, let's see if there's anything different in this memo. I doubt it, but, and if that's the case, then I would say, he was under pretty much the same amount of pressure. He's just got two emails instead of one. But let's see. I'm curious, because Ellis is pretty dumb. She could have come up with something else. In the memo, she outlined a multi-step strategy on January 6th, the day that Congress was to certify or, acknowledge the certification of the 2020 election results. Pence was to send back the electoral votes from 6 battleground states that Trump falsely claimed he had won. The memo said that Pence would give the states a deadline of 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 15th to send back a new set of votes, according to Karl. I mean, it's slightly different memo. It's just based on nothing. Like, why not say, my memo says we'll just hold the election over again. Well, but how? We don't have time for that. I know, but it's a memo nonetheless. And so therefore additional pressure. I guess so. Then Ellis wrote, if any state legislature missed that deadline, no electoral votes can be opened and counted from that state. I mean, I guess she's just kind of making it up as she goes along. Such a scenario would leave neither Biden nor Trump with a majority of votes, Ellis wrote, which would mean Congress shall vote by state delegation, which, Ellis said, would in turn lead to Trump being declared the winner due to Republicans controlling the majority of state delegations with 26. So again, this was on New Year's Eve. By the way, so this would have been 2 days before the new Congress was sworn in. Good thing, I guess, they kept the memo secret, because if I had gotten that memo on January 1st, I would have said, oh, well, how about this? Since we're making stuff up, on January 3rd, don't swear in any Republicans. Then we'll have the stalemate and we'll vote in the House of Representatives, but there won't be any Republicans in it because we're contesting all their elections. and then we'll win, and Joe Biden will be president. And we're none the worse for wear because he actually is president. So why not do things that way? But this, I guess, goes with the assumption that everybody gets sworn into Congress who they anticipated showing up with a certificate of election, and that there was no problems and no objections from Democrats whatsoever. And they're right, there wouldn't have been, and there weren't, and there didn't used to be. How do you like that? We'll have to learn how to use that properly. Anyway, such a scenario, right, would leave neither Biden nor Trump with the majority. They would vote in the House. She believes that for some reason all of the Republicans who claim to have been elected would have gotten sworn in on January 3rd, and then they'd win. The day after Meadows sent Ellis's memo to Pence's aide on January 1st, Trump aide Johnny McEntee, here's he again, sent another memo to Pence's chief of staff, Mark Short, titled Jefferson Used His Position as VP to Win. We actually mentioned that, and that might have been where we stopped reading the second time on the Johnny McEntee article. Remember that we are hearing an awful lot about Johnny McEntee, but this is Jonathan Karl making a big deal of him. And we're reading all these other things. But again, Jonathan Karl wrote the book. He wrote the article for The Atlantic. We read it twice. And now here ABC News is reporting about what Jonathan Karl says in his book. So he's really the only place where all this is coming from. But, apparently he's got a pile of sources saying Johnny McEntee was a jackass. So anyway, just a reminder of how we're getting our information, probably important. McEntee's memo, though, was also historically incorrect. And it didn't appear to be, a legal advice per se. But I guess since we didn't read it in The Atlantic, maybe we'll read it a little bit about it here. Right. So he sent this memo to Mark Short, Pence's chief of staff, titled Jefferson Used His Position as VP to Win. Although McEntee's memo was historically incorrect, Karl says his message was clear. Jefferson took advantage of his position and Pence must do the same. What followed during that first week of January was an effort by Trump, both personally and publicly, to push his vice president to take away Biden's victory. I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, Trump said at a roaring Georgia rally on January 4th, a day before Republicans would also lose their Senate majority. I have to tell you, I hope that our great vice president, who I want to hang, comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much, and I'll try to have him hanged. At a March 18th sit-down interview with Trump for the upcoming book, Karl asked former president about the report. They're getting it all in this one. From the New York Times that morning, on the morning of January 6th, Trump pressured Pence with a crude phone call, reportedly telling his vice president, you can be a patriot or you can be a... And this one is, let's see, there's a couple of asterisks here. It's the word that he used, and we used it for a little while and felt comfortable about it. Well, not really. Never really felt comfortable. It's the P word. You can be a patriot. It's alliterative. Or you can be a grab them by the... All right, so there you go. And so what? Karl asks him about that at Mar-a-Lago. Trump says, I wouldn't dispute it. Really? Karl responded. I wouldn't dispute it. Trump repeated. Later on that morning of January 6th, as Trump took the stage for his rally at the Ellipse prior to the Capitol attack, he publicly called on Pence to take action. If Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election, Trump told the roaring crowd. Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that'll be a sad day for our country. Hang him. All right. Hours later, after rioters had attacked the Capitol and the building was being evacuated, rioters were heard shouting, hang Mike Pence, as they left the complex. Yada, yada. Did you just yada, yada, hanging the vice president? I did. But Trump told Karl that he never contacted his vice president to check on his safety. No, I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. Whatever that's supposed to mean. No, because I heard that he was in very good shape, he said again, to no effect. Pressed about those chants, Trump told Karl that Pence made a mistake in certifying the vote. He could have, the people were very angry. I think we played this tape, actually. If you know a vote is fraudulent, right, how can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress? How can you do that? Well, it wasn't fraudulent. That's the answer. Asked by Karl if had Pence done as Trump wanted, Trump would still be in the White House. Trump replied, I think we would have won. Yeah. Trump also couldn't say if he would ever forgive Pence for certifying the election, a rare act of dissent from an otherwise loyal vice president. I don't know, Trump said, because I picked him. I like him. I still like him, but I don't know that I can forgive him. And asked by Carl if Pence was on his short list for vice president, should Trump run again in 2024, Trump wouldn't say. What kind of question is that? He did the wrong thing, Trump said of Pence. A very nice man. I like him a lot. I like his family so much, but it was a tragic mistake. Just ridiculous question. Of course he's not on the short list for that. All right. I don't know. I'm now tempted to go back again to that Johnny McEntee article, but it just seems like that's not really the direction to go. Let me see what else we got in pocket. Remind myself of the very important things that we have to talk about. Okay, yes, so we got to go in other directions. How about this one? Let's stay with the insurrection theme for the time being. And I, not Greg, is going to read from the Bulwark, just because why not? It sounded interesting. Christian Vanderbroek writes this piece of some interest. Another take on the Claremont Institute's wargaming that I read to you about, that Lindsay Beierstein had written about. I think we talked about it on Friday. So I just thought it might be interesting to take another look at it from a different perspective. Notes on an authoritarian conspiracy inside the Claremont Institute's 79 Days to Inauguration report. I don't think we got the title out of Lindsay. That's not important. She didn't overlook anything there, but that's a new... No, it's a new fact. We have it now. Claremont's post-election war game provides a window into the group's ambitions. And that was Lindsay's thesis, too. But let's continue. The sun rises on January 6, 2021, while a nation is in crisis. Setting the scene for us. Michigan's presidential electors are in dispute after a mysterious fire in Detroit destroyed thousands of mail-in ballots, ultimately throwing the election to Congress. I guess this is the fantasy scenario. And remember, just to refresh your memory, what was really amazing about this is that the Claremont Institute war-gamed the thing based on the assumption that their plot would work and that Trump would be able to manufacture belief that he had in fact won the presidency, on a technicality. And that, too, there would be violence at the Capitol and around the country, but that it would be Democratic and left-wing violence rising up in opposition to what they believed was a stolen election. And the projection is just incredible. But it also tells you kind of, they were planning for violence, whether planning to cause the violence or whether planning to provoke the violence. All their plans ended in violent confrontation rather than a peaceful transfer of power, and that's bad and troubling. They're bad, and they should feel bad about it. Okay. So in their fantasy, Michigan's presidential electors are in dispute because mysterious fire in Detroit destroys mail-in ballots, ultimately throwing the election to Congress. The nation's capital is overwhelmed by riots organized by left-wing radicals. And then, of course, when they organized their own right-wing radical riot, first thing they said was, let's tell everybody that it's actually left-wing radicals. And then they abandoned that part of the plan. A Republican member of Congress in this fantasy is attacked and critically injured in the violence, potentially depriving Donald Trump of the decisive vote. However, the representative heroically insists on being taken to the House floor. With IVs and blood transfusions being administered, the member casts the deciding vote, giving Trump 26 state delegations and the needed majority. They forgot about, COVID and remote voting and all of this. This is the grisly climax of a report published in mid-October of 2020 by the Claremont Institute and Texas Public Policy Foundation called 79 Days to Inauguration, prepared by, quote, constitutional scholars, along with experts in election law, foreign affairs, law enforcement, and media, coordinated by a retired military officer experienced in running hundreds of war games. Among these luminaries were figures such as John Eastman, of course, lawyer for Donald Trump, author of a memo advising Vice President Mike Pence to unilaterally block certification of Biden's win in order to buy time for GOP-controlled state legislatures to send competing slates of electors, and K.T. McFarland, who used to serve as Deputy National Security Advisor until under Mike Flynn, in the Trump White House. Mike Flynn, of course, notorious spy and crackpot. Other participants include Kevin Roberts. We might as well get all the names out because they'll all be subpoenaed sooner or later. Then Executive Director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, soon to be head of the Heritage Foundation, so easy to subpoena, easy to reach here in D.C. Jeff, I don't know how you pronounce this, Giesea, I got no idea. Giesea. Giesea? I don't know. Who cares? Who is he? He's a Peter Thiel protege and secret funder of alt-right causes. So, what the hell? Scoop him up too. Charles Haywood, a fringe blogger who anxiously awaits an American, quote, Caesar, authoritarian reconstructor of our institutions. Whatever, dude. Let's see. What's this insert? Oh, I guess this is a whole list of names here. I mean, I guess I'll just read them out so that if it comes up or any of them ring bells, you'll know. Let's see. Ryan Williams, president of Claremont Institute. Chuck DeVore. I believe we've heard that name before. He's vice president of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, former California State Assemblyman. He was the simulation designer and umpire. Like they actually had one here. John Eastman, you know. Jeff with the weird last name, Giese. I have no idea how you would even approach pronunciation of this. He's an entrepreneur, he's listed, and a communication strategist. Charles Haywood, right, we mentioned. Jason Isaac, director, what? Oh my God, the titles in these. Anyway, he's from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, a former Texas state representative. Brian T. Kennedy, president of the American Strategy Group. I feel like I've heard his name recently. It might have been in connection with this. I don't know. K.T. McFarland, we said before. Roy Maynard, senior writer for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Kevin Roberts, executive director of the Texas thingamabob. Chelsea Murphy, Florida state director for the Right on Crime Initiative. And also from Texas Public Policy Foundation. Jeff Nyquist is just thrown out there with no qualifications whatsoever. Kai Olbert, K-Y, independent researcher. Oh, boy. Gladden Papin, that's a real name, allegedly. Department of Politics at the University of Dallas. I don't know anything about the University of Dallas. Is it anything like the University of Austin? Also, deputy editor of American Affairs. Randy Peterson, senior researcher of the Texas People. James Quintero, director of the Center for Local Governance at the Texas thingy. Kyle Scheidler. Kyle Scheidler, maybe. Shideler. Senior analyst and director for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism at the Center for Security Policy. Last one, Ron Simmons, distinguished senior fellow at the Texas thingy and former state representative for Texas. There you go. So remember the names and hang them all. Yet, despite the author's pretensions to scholarship and rigor, for a simulation to be valuable, the other side gets a vote and actions must be based in realism. The final document is a frenzied and paranoid piece of work revealing the anxieties and aspirations of the authoritarian right. Practically, the report is an instruction manual for how Trump partisans at all levels of government, aided by citizen, quote, posses of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, could, quite literally, round up opposition activists, kill their leaders, and install Donald Trump for a second term in office. Well, once you allow that in your war game, I guess there's no point in gaming it out. I mean, all right, here's the other side's war game. I don't know if Democrats really want to adopt this war game. Let's round them all up and kill them, and then we'll have no problems. I mean, it's a war game, right? So acts of war, I guess, are going to be valid. And although, it's not much of an intellectual exercise, is it? All right. Well, we're going to run out of time to deal with this before the break. We'll come back to it afterwards. But we'll read another paragraph or two as set up. The scenario begins late on election night. The networks have declared Joe Biden the winner, and his campaign has now upset Trump in the state of Texas. So that's pretty wild and speculative. I don't think anybody was predicting that, but these guys are all from Texas, so I don't know. They bring the action home. This is their Jade Helm. The call is withdrawn moments later, following reports of a cyber attack involving the state's tabulation system. As it becomes clear there will be no definitive winner on election night, attention shifts to a few battleground states with large numbers of outstanding ballots. And boy, are they outstanding. Some of them were burned in fires, of course. We'll get back to this craziness after this.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's continue with this look from the Bulwark's point of view at just how crazy this Claremont Institute war game thingy was. Remember, the whole thing is premised on their being able to pull off this stupid coup thing, up to and including rounding up Democrats and killing them, I guess. And there being a Democratic and left-wing uprising in the streets that they need to put down. The attack on the Capitol, in their view, comes from the left because, well, they've just rounded up Democrats and killed them in order to take over the country. And, so it would be kind of a justified uprisings. When they couldn't engineer this scenario ahead of January 6th and successfully get the election overturned, they had to go the other way and just say, okay, well, the uprising and such at the Capitol will be right-wing directed instead. And curiously, no left-wing militias rounded up right-wingers and killed them. Maybe we missed our chance on that one. Maybe that was a mistake, but we just weren't organized for that. I'm sorry to say, but okay, probably for the best. Where were we with this? Yes, right. So, as I said, as it becomes clear there will be no definitive winner on election night, attention now shifts to a few battleground states with large numbers of outstanding ballots because the Texas debacle that they designed for themselves. Somehow it is said that Biden wins Texas, then they change their mind because it turns out there was a cyber attack. Riots next. This is a quote from their report. Riots break out in more than a dozen major cities. 14 law enforcement officers are known to have been shot, although I would have questioned that right from the get-go. I mean, just add that, I would say. I mean, maybe if after the fact we verify this, fine. But I'm questioning it right away, along with cement milkshakes, and there's a tampon in my Frappuccino, and look at these Molotov cocktails that we found, and they're really just like a bunch of broken Snapple bottles or whatever. Okay, sure. Cops say that 14 law enforcement officers were known to have been shot, with one confirmed death. So they've all been shot in the leg, it turns out. There are unconfirmed reports of a car bombing of a police precinct building in Philadelphia. Okay, so what do the guys at the Claremont institution now fantasize that would be justifiable to do? Let's find out. The violence, as imagined by Claremont and TPPF, overwhelms police and fire officials. They go on to quote some more. Police recede to a defensive posture around their precincts. It is unsafe to maneuver police vehicles down the streets, and responding to calls for service, even emergency calls, is suspended. Fire departments are unable to approach buildings on fire without police escorts, which are not happening. The next day, the federal government announces Operation Spearfish. Now remember, this is the Trump administration that they would say, okay, in response to all of this, we recommend, or we imagine you would, launch Operation Spearfish, targeting leaders and agitators within the groups associated with BLM, Antifa, Boogaloo, like that's leftist, and NFAC. And that's linked, and I'm going to have to click on that and figure out what that is. NFAC. NFAC protest in Lafayette Square over the police shooting of Trayford Pellerin ends peacefully. This is dated October 4th, 2020, so right around the time that they were having this exercise. I still don't know what they're talking about. NFAC. Oh. Honestly, I'm sorry. I never heard of it. And maybe I should have. Look at this. Ready? Here's the background on them. A protest organized by a black paramilitary group, that's what they're afraid of, and attended by several community groups, ended peacefully on Saturday in Lafayette, Louisiana. Okay. Despite the arrest of one person who police say accidentally fired a weapon at the event. Oh, a gun fell and I missed it. The NFAC is the Not Effing Around Coalition. I like that. That's a straightforward name for your, black paramilitary group. How do you like that? The leader of the NFAC, the Not Effing Around Coalition, said the person who accidentally discharged the firearm was not part of their group. That's what I would say. More than 400 armed demonstrators with the NFAC came to the city to protest the death of Trayford Pellerin, a 31-year-old black man who was fatally shot by police in August. This part, again, just as a reminder, I am reading this from a CNN report that was linked in the Bulwark's reporting on the Claremont Institution's report. The Claremont Institution's report, of course, is the fantasy. But there is a real, this really happened with a group that told reporters they were called the NFAC. I don't know how enduring the coalition actually is, but it was only a matter of time until you had something like this, right? I mean, with white people parading around with long guns and doing so not only undisturbed by police, but very often tacitly supported by police. It was only a matter of time until black paramilitaries were formed to do the same thing, just if for no other reason than to test the willingness of the police to allow them to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Why the hell not? And then, if they actually had a real thing to protest, a real person was shot here, then why not go for it? Anyway, apparently that really gave the Claremont Institution guys nightmares, while the rest of us promptly forgot about it, because they apparently had their protest and it went entirely peacefully, and though somebody discharged a firearm, but here we are. How awash in guns are we? Where was a big gun rally and an accidental discharge at it, but that was just a bystander who also happened to be armed. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, good eye from Australia, I guess now. Good eye from Christian Vanderbroek in covering this, distilling this Claremont Institution thing and saying, we're going to have to link to this. This gave the Claremont Institution guys fits because they're white conservatives, and they no doubt lost sleep over this thing. Everybody else in America is like, what? Who? So we had to link to it. That's interesting all by itself. Anyway, right. So Operation Spearfish is a Trump administration, so far imaginary operation, rounding up, I guess. They're targeting BLM, Antifa, Boogaloo, and NFAC with over 1,000 arrest warrants issued using federal and state statutes from RICO to disorderly conduct. The decision to obtain arrest warrants, even for the barest minimum of probable cause on the lowest of charges, is meant to remove the players from the picture, at least temporarily. Social media sources and other intelligence sources were used to find any instances of incitement to violence, threats, or other criminal activity that met federal or local statutes and act on them. So again here, time out. In the Republican fantasy, they crack down like crazy and they round up everybody, including anybody, who tweeted about anything that could be viewed as incitement to violence. Now compare that to the reality of the real violence having been launched by the right wing and the real use of social media by others who weren't even necessarily present on January 6th to incite violence over social media, and view the response and compare them versus what's going on here, right? Thousands arrested, people, who knows, we'll get to the rest of this, but they seem to hint that some of these people are killed, right? Whereas we're like, gee whiz, I don't know, maybe we should arrest this guy who smashed Nancy Pelosi's desk to smithereens and took a crap on the Capitol floor and smeared it on the walls. And we're like, okay, well, let's have him do like 6 days probation or something. I mean, by the way, honestly, it's interesting that they project, one, and two, that it's so, that the backlash is so heavy-handed and that they fantasize about themselves coming down like a ton of bricks on everybody that they possibly can. And then when they really do the stuff, we say you're going to have 6 hours detention after school. And they're like, tyranny. It's pretty amazing, the things that make them cry and the things that make them quake. Who even remembers NFAC? I don't know. Remember, go back to the narrative on this now. Remember that this narrative, the Claremont narrative, is the result of a role-playing exercise in which the participants imagined themselves as key decision makers of the federal government. The actions described, therefore, might be best understood as a combination of group therapy and suggestions for how they believe the federal government and law enforcement should behave in a moment of constitutional crisis. Very interesting, very revealing. Good point. Some of the report is revealing. Some of it is sad. Some of it is darkly funny. For instance, the author's recommendation for mass politically motivated arrests, quote, to remove the players from the picture, unquote, sits oddly next to the right's outraged reaction to the prosecution of Trump supporters who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Oops, I shouldn't have bothered making that point myself. Christian was doing it. And we'll get to it in just a minute. There's more irony in how the task force imagines right-wing gangs would operate during such a period, with quiet discipline and in cooperation with law enforcement. That, of course, the way Putin would have it, right? It was motorcycle gangs, oligarchs with motorcycle gangs who live in Miami. What was it? What's the name of the? I can't remember the name of the development out there, but living in the Trump buildings in the Miami area and running motorcycle gangs. Whatever. Now, more quoting from the Claremont report: a lack of social media activity and overt action by the rioting. By the rioting by members? All right, this is written poorly, this report. Not the write-up of it. This is a quote from the report. A lack of social media activity and overt action by the rioting, I'm just going to eliminate that second by the rioting members of the Proud Boys, maybe, draws the attention of law enforcement officials suspecting they may be operating covertly on the ground in several major urban rioting areas, but their exact involvement is unknown. But they maintain social media radio silence, which is also very unlikely. Okay. Reports of militias moving into suburban areas is being monitored, which is, of course, the freak out that they kept having about Antifa and their buses, right? Several groups affiliated with the 3%ers and Oath Keepers have openly offered to assist law enforcement in putting down the violence via social media, touting significant current and retired law enforcement and military membership. Now back to the narrative, which is, of course, not how the Trumpist forces behaved during the actual crisis, with an embedded picture of what they actually did, including the picture of the Q shaman guy who actually got sentenced the other day, and I think we forgot to mention it. In reading the report, and I don't even remember offhand what he got, In reading the report, it becomes clear that the task force participants see law enforcement as a critical adjunct to the more traditional political actors, and that they believe law enforcement would act with greater impunity and force independent from, and in times in defiance of, elected leaders. Back to the Claremont report fantasy, there are rumors that several sheriffs in conservative counties throughout the country are hinting that they may deputize regular citizens into posses should the lawlessness come to their counties, with 6 people in them. Social media is ablaze with volunteers from Proud Boys, 3%ers, and Oath Keepers and other posse comitatus groups to form posses. At this point, Kyle Rittenhouse mobilizes himself, I'm sure. So, back to the description. This isn't an innocent game of what if. Earlier this year, the Claremont Institute created a Sheriff's Fellowship program. Claremont claims that this program will offer, quote, training of unparalleled depth and excellence in American political thought and institutions, of which sheriffs are of no interest. But okay. But then, this is the same group that produced a report hoping that, quote, several sheriffs in conservative counties would give groups like the Proud Boys actual legal authority. So which is it? Law enforcement plays an openly insurrectionist role throughout the 79 days exercise, defying civilian leaders, refusing to offer them protection, and threatening them with arrest. For example, the report imagines Chicago police, with vocal backing from their union, abandoning Mayor Lori Lightfoot's residential block, permitting protesters to set up camp on her front lawn. In imagined dialogue, the war game quotes the city's Fraternal Order of Police president as saying, quote, we have officers risking their lives by not shooting people they should be shooting or waiting too long because Lightfoot and her Soros-funded prosecutor, Kim Fox, seems more interested in arresting cops than criminals. And now it turns out that that would have been the right thing to do, and the cops should be arrested as criminals, but never mind all of that. The union leader goes on to defend a police sick-out. Fox and Lightfoot use this department and its officers as political scapegoats all the time. Maybe they will enjoy not having us around. Maybe. An excessive force against rioters. Take a look out the window there. You tell me what the hell is excessive right now, says the imaginary union leader. The authors use an imaginary appearance by former Milwaukee Sheriff David Clark on Fox News to issue an open threat to elected leaders of the potential opposition, which is imagined as going, quote, viral. And here it is. The police are here to protect people and preserve the peace. They will do that. Politicians might get in the way for a while, like they're doing right now, but at some point, cops will remember their oath and will take back their communities for the good, law-abiding people in those communities. You won't want to be on the other side of that once they have had enough of this nonsense. That might be something he might actually say. The National Fraternal Order of Police issues a partisan statement attacking Joe Biden's, quote, irresponsible call for peaceful protests, calling on President Trump to assist our men and women in blue in putting an end to the violence and anarchy and to restore law and order. At which point, the 79 Days report moves into truly authoritarian wish casting. Oh, now they step it up. Ready? Federal and local law enforcement officials, quote, entered into meetings with Google, Facebook, and Twitter to discuss tracking phones and electronic communications devices that have been traveling together to various cities to track various, quote, agitator groups. Checkpoints are established along major corridors entering Michigan, Texas, and Florida to stop and detain any suspicious caravans of large transport vehicles and to identify passengers for verification in the safe state fusion centers as members of Antifa and BLM are expected to descend on the Capitol buildings in those states. I think not. The FBI's elite counter-terrorist hostage rescue team, why not? Bring the G.I. Joe in, sure, is sent to, quote, execute search warrants for weapons in and around Washington, D.C., even though there's no hostages involved. 7 Antifa members are killed by gunfire, during the simultaneous raids with no injuries to the agents. It's all magical. It works very well. No one asks, where are the hostages that we were sent to rescue? And the answer is, there are no hostages. We just think that the FBI hostage rescue team sounds like a cool outfit, and we want to have you guys like do awesome stuff. Okay. They didn't bother like learning the names of the FBI division that might actually execute this server. And what's funny is that would probably be the ATF, and they hate the ATF. So I guess that's why they don't send them. A barely concealed bloodlust runs through the report during a battle with rioters at a Portland police precinct building. And I think we're talking Oregon, not Maine, but watch out, Bill. Here's what happens. A SWAT sniper, because SWAT is awesome, conducting Overwatch. Wow, man. Overwatch. Shot and killed one of the arsonists as he drew his arm back to throw his device. 6 months later, we found out he was a Boogaloo boy, but for now, he's supposed to be a BLM guy, I guess. This is, of course, captured on police surveillance video and released immediately. And just to make it really realistic, their thing says, warning, graphic. Even though the picture not only is fake, it doesn't exist. And they didn't even put it in their report. The Molotov cocktail exploded when he dropped the bottle and covered several rioters in flames, 3 injured severely, and 1 dead at the scene. At a confrontation near the White House, a non-lethal directed energy weapon called the active denial system is used against protesters to great effect with limited, precise application to specific threats. Social media erupts with claims of abuse through military weaponry, which was happening. The body count, it wasn't happening. They imagined it was happening, so the social media explosion would have been right about what was happening. The body count grows with, quote, officer-involved shootings related to the RICO-authorized Operation Spearfish, resulting in, quote, at least 3 suspects dead. Not a very big operation. However, none of the agencies is releasing information on the circumstances or identities of the officers or suspects involved, citing the ongoing investigation. These raids, which operate with all the impunity of a death squad, quote, are executed in middle to upper class neighborhoods where the Antifa and BLM activists leadership tend to reside. So, Bel Air, right? Okay, the hotbed of BLM and Antifa activity. I would have said yes to Antifa because everyone knows that they live in mansions because of their, anti-capitalist anarchism. But, of course, you need to have a BLM element there. So, obviously, Bel Air, because the Fresh Prince lives in Bel Air. Or did on television, as the last time I watched as a white person. So, that's how I know. I've done my own research. Bel Air is the place to go. All right. The exercise ends with crude myth-making. The noble and sacrificial decision by a, quote, Republican member from an at-large delegation. It's one of those states too small to really be represented in Congress at all, but we made a promise that everybody would get a representative, so you get one. Member from an at-large delegation. North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, Wyoming. South Dakota have 2? I don't know. I can't remember anymore. All right. Anyway, they suffered from life-threatening wounds, who, understanding what is at stake, demands to be transported to the House for the state delegation vote and arrives in a heavily guarded convoy. I'm not certain where he gets injured or which person in Wyoming killed him or tried to kill him or whatever. But there you have it. He was probably in D.C. and attacked by, I don't know, the Fresh Prince is in Bel Air. So some other dangerous black person probably did it, right? Okay. Anyway, this isn't a serious war game or policy study so much as a bowdlerized, how do we pronounce this? Retelling of the Turner Diaries. Oh, good memory. Good pull there. Okay. The 79 Days Report was created as a rejoinder to the bipartisan Transition Integrity Project's exercise on preventing a disrupted presidential election and transition. That's very interesting. So we will wargame preventing it and keeping things peaceful and having a peaceful transfer of power. Claremont Institution says, oh, how dare you, you liberal bastards, we're going to war game a real war, and it's going to get violent, and we kill everybody in ours. So there you go. We're a think tank. Ha! Founded in June of 2020, the TIP, the Transition Integrity Project, gathered more than 100 experts, including Bill Kristol, editor-at-large of the Bulwark. They need to, I think they're there by way of disclosure, not by way of saying, what an expert he is. But they're probably bragging on it a little bit too. Anyway, the game was there to game out a number of scenarios, including the worrying prospect that a refusal by President Trump to concede defeat would lead to violence. The TIP final report also included detailed recommendations to avoid a crisis. That's a nice thing to do, such as educating state and local officials about their constitutional responsibilities, combating misinformation, and ensuring that protests were not hijacked by violent actors or agent provocateurs, or agents provocateur. I don't know how you would say that, but they say agent provocateurs. Peaceful protesters will need specialized training on de-escalation and nonviolent techniques and on how to document the nonviolent nature of their protests, given the likelihood that agitators will attempt to blame any violence on them, goes one tip recommendation. Another tip proposal is for military and law enforcement leaders to be particularly attuned to the possibility that partisan actors will seek to manipulate or misuse their coercive powers for inappropriate political ends. And in fact, they did do that. We just learned about that from Greg, or were reminded anyway of that from Greg and Johnny McEntee's confrontation with whatever the hell his name was over at the Pentagon. The throwaway guy. We should be lauding him, but whatever. He was minimally dedicated to the Constitution. That's nice. To the extent that the Claremont TPPF report offers recommendations, they are mostly focused on how to emerge victorious from the chaos, including preparation for destructive urban unrest with potential targets including ballot counting facilities, government buildings, especially state capitals and city halls, as well as television and radio studios. So they made a target list. These are the places we should trash and burn. Tip said, here are the things we should do to avoid upheaval and violence. Take your pick. I mean, campaign on that too, as Greg was saying. The Claremont Task Force seems either resigned to or perhaps energized by the view that, quote, prudent steps are likely to be spun as preparations for a military takeover or coup and may result in negative consequences either way. Either way. It's as if they're steering into the violence instead of trying to avoid it. The message is clear. Do whatever it takes to crush your opponents and all will be forgiven in the second Trump term. That was surely the plan. Indeed, the wargamers expect readers to find their work heartening, precisely because the bloodshed and strife will lead to the outcome they desire. We hope that our work will reassure the American people that our system of government is resilient, having been crafted by the founders to withstand crises and to emerge through the turmoil with a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, except for the ones we killed, that shall not perish from the earth, except in cases in which they do, but endure to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our children. Why not use posterity? That's the line, but they chose not to for whatever reason. We'll wind it up here in the last minute or so. The establishment conservatives like to pretend they can insulate themselves from the big lie that Trump won the 2020 election, but the big lie doesn't stand up all by itself. It requires the supporting architecture of smaller lies and evasions, like the claim that our republic was never really threatened because Donald Trump lacks sufficient competence. The particular focus on Trump, the particular focus on Trump, the man, misses the movement for its leader. Given the weight of the evidence against that larger movement, one wonders if the myopia is intentional. And that's the end of the article. Again, thanks to Christian Vanderbroek for bringing this up. Vanderbroek, in case you were wondering, served 8 years in the George W. Bush administration, for which you may not forgive him, but okay, and later managed global affairs and government relations at the New York Stock Exchange. And you can find him on Twitter, if you want to, at Urban Achiever. Why not? Sure. You can tell him this was an interesting article and thank him for wading through the garbage so that you didn't have to. But then guess what? We did. We didn't wade through all the however many pages of the 79 days of chaos or whatever the hell the title of the report was. Pretty amazing. I I'm glad we read it. It was a lot more detail than Lindsay Bierstein gave. She really distilled it down to its essence, though, and told us what the whole thing was really all about and why it was so dangerous and why it ought to be viewed properly as evidence in the January 6th investigation and any prosecutions, should we ever finally get to any, that ensue. But yeah, thanks then to the tag team, Lindsay for bringing it to our attention and properly framing it, and then Christian for filling in details of just how much bloodlust really went into this. It's really quite amazing. And I think a decent use of our time, even though it means we didn't get to, 10 to 15,000 other stories that we could have covered and will probably spend some time on in the next couple days over the coming week. But if you don't want to wait that long, there's always, of course, Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. And you know how widely he casts his net. Let's see what he's got in store for you today. Starting off on his Bistro Cafe. Delicious. Bannon is expected to surrender to authorities today. I forgot about that part. After being charged with the 2 counts of contempt of Congress, he was going to turn himself in rather than be rounded up. Then on the rest of the menu, as many as 160,000 active duty military members are having trouble feeding their families. Wow. Part of a hotbed of abuse, graft, and corruption during the Trump administration, hundreds of Bureau of Prisons workers continue to commit crime.
From networksradio.com.
And more. Hold on.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Speaking of the collapse of everything, conservative U.S. bishops ignored the Pope and persist in denouncing President Joe Biden. And internationally, Spain summoned the Cuban envoy in Madrid after Spanish media credentials were revoked in Havana. That and much more from around the country and around the world next.